Our special guest here has arrived in our studio, and he is someone who is, well, not from around these parts. We're doing the show from New Hampshire. He's come all the way here from New Mexico, and his name is Gary Johnson. Gary, good evening. You're on Free Talk Live.
Ian, it's great to be on with you. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming in tonight. What is it that brings you to New Hampshire?
Well,
during this time of year.
Excuse me.
It's certainly not the most friendly time of year to be in New Hampshire.
Well, so over the last 14 months, I've started Our America Initiative, which is an advocacy committee. I'm the honorary chairman, which allows me to raise money and speak out on the issues of the day. And so in the last 14 months, this is my 8th trip to New Hampshire. In the last 14 months, I've probably addressed 500 groups. And if you're doing the math and thinking that's not possible,
you're busy man.
Yeah.
Well,
trying to put a voice to what I think is the national outrage over being bankrupt and the solutions that go along with that.
Well, what's new? Hasn't the federal government been bankrupt for, I don't know, longer than I've been alive?
They certainly been in the red.
Yeah. No, clearly. But my entire life, I've watched government take in more money, take in less money than what it spends. And I go back maybe to when I was 9 years old. I just thought, this is not sustainable as a 9-year-old.
Yeah, it's not hard to figure it out, right?
And, about 50 years later, I just think the day of reckoning is here. It's now. And I can't believe it has lasted this long.
I was looking over, I've got the bio here on the internet. You can go to ouramericaninitiative.com and see it just like I am. And the little bullet point I like here is, while in office, Governor Johnson vetoed 750 bills, which is about equal to all the combined vetoes of the other 49 governors in the country at the time, with thousands of line item vetoes. So you put a stop to a lot of legislation.
Well, I put a stop to a lot of legislation, and when you think about legislation, when you think about the notion of liberty and freedom and how that can be impacted by non-government action. Look, somebody gets wronged when it comes to a real estate transaction. So they go to their legislator and they say, let's write up a piece of legislation so that nothing like this ever happens to anybody again. And the legislature writes up the legislation. Well, you can compound that by 1,000 times. So we have 1,000 pieces of legislation that's going to prevent that from ever happening again.
Because it's magic. Legislation's magic.
Because it's magic. And of course, what happens is that those situations still occur. And the fact is that for all of us that need to have real estate transactions, they've been so compounded, they've been made so difficult that you vow, I'm never going to do this again because of the government and what they've done. But it just carries over to every single aspect of government.
Sure, a lot of people say that about business. They look into. I'm in radio, obviously, and I always loved the idea of having a radio station. And when I looked into getting one through the legal channels, it's impossible.
I can imagine. Exactly. A young kid hurts his head pole vaulting in northern New Mexico. Well, this is concerned parents that go to the legislator and say, look, we need to pass a law that requires helmets for kids pole vaulting. Next thing you know, on my desk is mandatory helmets for pole vaulters. I vetoed it.
You can stick with us for a while, right? You don't have to run out the door.
No.
Okay, more with Gary Johnson here in a moment.
I was told I have to perform. I was told it's got to be entertaining.
We'll tell you more about him in a bit in case you've never heard of him before. 800-259-9231. He's got quite the interesting history, especially in the war on drugs. More coming up. This is Free Talk Live. This is Free Talk Live. It is the live Saturday edition of the program. You can take control of the airwaves, dial in toll free, bring up whatever you want, though. If you have a question for Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico, he is here sitting in our studio with us tonight, which is very unusual. It's unusual from two aspects. One, that we would have a politician on Free Talk Live at all.
It just doesn't happen very often.
And two, that one would be actually in the studio with us on top of that. Did we have Ron Paul in the studio at one point? I feel like we did. No.
I don't think we ever had Ron Paul in the studio.
Must have just been on the phones then. So, yeah, I mean, Ron Paul is pretty much the only other politician besides John Dennis, I think, that we've had on this program.
We've had local politicians from New Hampshire when we've been at ad events. So when we're interviewing in every single segment, there have been politicians, local politicians that really don't,
So I'm thinking that's a good omen. I'm thinking this is a good omen. This is a good thing.
I don't like politicians in general, but I like you, Gary Johnson, because
I couldn't believe it.
We're just starting in, so I don't want you to jump to any
You've
conclusions.
actually done things for liberty, and I appreciate that. You're somebody who you made a name for yourself, at least to me, when you came out against the insanity of the war on drugs. And that was a long time ago that you did that, too.
You know what I like to point out to people is I did get to serve. I did get to be governor of New Mexico for 8 years. New Mexico's 2-1 Democrat. So when it comes to all those vetoes, you guys know no doesn't fly. The no's get debated, they get discussed, and that gets done on the front page of the newspaper and on television. And the whole defense of it was, look, we don't need to be growing government. Growing government is not the solution to any of our problems. As a matter of fact, shrinking government would be the real solution. The notion of a handshake, the notion of just common sense is what really prevails in our life from day to day. Laws that get passed that affect that end up costing us a lot of time and a lot of money and really don't make a difference.
Yeah, I have to agree that the regulations make it difficult for people to do business when, in fact, if you have a problem, we have a dispute resolution organization. It's called the courts. Now, I'll admit it's arduous to use them, extraordinarily expensive, but if the politicians spend as much time trying to make the courts functional as they do trying to make regulations, then we might actually have functional courts. I mean, I find it difficult to imagine that they would be successful at it, but they could work on that.
So, by the way, we're going to come back with a few more questions. And, Gary, I don't know how long you can stick with us here tonight, so that's up to you.
I was told by Brink here that and Brink is helping coordinate what I'm doing here,
yes.
Slattery in New Hampshire, and terrific guy.
Nice
but anyway, Brink says, as long as, man, Gary, you got to be entertaining, and maybe they'll keep you on for a while. So the longer I'm on, I guess the better.
I suppose you're right about that. But first, we need to tell you about how to get. Is it gold and silver, Mark?
That's right.
Okay.
On Free Talk Live, we talk about investing in gold and silver on a regular basis. You can't listen to talk radio without hearing about gold. That's for sure. Whether it's a hedge against inflation or an investment or a barter currency, we've teamed up with Midas Resources in order to bring you some really great rates. I think these are probably the best rates you're going to find from some organization that's selling precious metals on the internet. But please, before you buy anywhere, check at gold.freetalklive.com. We've got coins there that I've picked out that are for the purpose of getting gold and silver into the hands of people, not collector coins in order to sort of muddy the waters as to what's worth what. Just go to gold.freetalklive.com. I think you'll get the best deal, and it'll give you an opportunity to price check against other places. Gold.freetalklive.com.
So, Gary Johnson, what was it that brought you to the conclusion on the war on drugs issue? I mean, how did you get to the point of being different from the average Republican on this? I mean, Republicans have kind of historically been, we're going to tell you what to do with your body. You don't own yourself, and we know what's best for you in this area. How did you break away from that viewpoint?
Well, so Ian, I suppose it's multiple fronts, multiple different reasons. I'm opposed to the war on drugs A through Z, but I guess I go back with my own history. I smoke pot.
When?
Through college. I mean, I've smoked pot. That's something that I have done.
Me too.
And
yes, he has.
And as a result of that, I can tell you there's a big difference. And for a lot of those listening, I know this is maybe going to end up being redundant, but I understand that there's a big difference between marijuana and alcohol. And the big difference is that marijuana is a lot safer than alcohol. It
could kill you if a bale of it fell from the roof on top of you.
Yeah, that's probably about it.
My contact with marijuana was I was a jock. I was an athlete.
You still are,
and I still am.
Triathlete,
and
correct?
just multiple sports.
Yeah.
I'm an active guy. I'm as fit a 58-year-old as there. I realize there are a lot of fit 58-year-olds, but I'm one of them.
You're not jogging to McDonald's or anything. You're just jogging.
just jogging, right. But when I first came in contact with marijuana, wow. Here viewed it like so many did. I think that this was enlightenment. This was, this was a way of being able to say and do things that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to say and do, and it really didn't have the repercussions of alcohol. It didn't have a hangover. I mean, it was terrific. Now, I came to the conclusion in my own life that when you smoke it all the time, and by all the time I was actually asked to quantify that, and I think quantifying it was a couple times a week. That's what I smoked marijuana. But I came to recognize that that it isn't something that you should do all the time. That it's a handicap. Now, this is my own life. This is the judgment that I came to, and I also came to that judgment when it came to alcohol. So I don't drink, I don't smoke pot, but I've done it, and so that is a background. So I get and this was not anything I hid running for governor of New Mexico. But
so you didn't. That's good to know, because I wasn't aware of that. I didn't know if you had gotten elected and then came out of the closet later on.
No. This was something that I volunteered. This was something that I had done in my life. This was right.
Good for you for not backing away from that.
Well, I always kind of, I'll use the word detest, but I didn't like the fact that Clinton said, "Look, I
he didn't inhale.
I didn't inhale." Well, oh gosh, that's I inhaled. I inhaled.
Now,
I didn't exhale.
Did anyone believe that?
You had some kind of accident or something, and then the marijuana helped you with the pain?
Well, this is recently, but if I can just go back to Ian's, that's all right. But going back to Ian's for a second, I came at this from the standpoint that, first of all, as governor of New Mexico, everything was going to be a cost-benefit analysis. What are we spending our money, and what are we getting for the money that we're spending? So I wanted to crack down on drinking and driving. The notion that you would do harm to others, drinking and driving, well, it's a big problem. It's a big problem in every state, and this goes back to 1999. I wanted to crack down on it. Well, the police, they don't have the resources. The courts, they need more resources. Prisons, they're full, and you're going to have to build more prisons. I mean, that's just going to be a reality. Well, what is it that you all do? And I'm oversimplifying here, but what is it that you all do? Well, it turns out that half of what they do is half of law enforcement, half the courts, and half the prisons is drug-related. And to what end? We're arresting 1.8 million people a year in this country. We now have 2.3 million people behind bars in this country. We have the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. That's where I came at this from. That's how I started. I looked at the issue. I came to the conclusion that 90% of the drug problem is prohibition-related, not use-related.
No doubt about it. We're going to come back with more.
I hear that music coming
You hear
in.
the music? 800-25. That's what it's all about, too, by the way, for the government, is the money. They sure do love that aspect of the funding and the money they get to confiscate and stuff like that. 800-259-9231. More coming up with Gary Johnson. It's Free Talk. This is Free Talk Live. It's the live Saturday edition of the program. You can take control of the airwaves and bring up whatever you want at 800-259-9231, that number. Brought to you by SACL CAI. You can visit our website at freetalklive.com and enjoy the various features that we have for you there, including listening options. You can go to listen.freetalklive.com to learn about them and tune in. We've got broadband and dial-up streams. Our list of 94 excellent radio stations across the country that carry the show at various times throughout the week, plus our webcam, our free-to-air satellite channel, and listen lines that allow you to call in from any phone that can dial long distance and listen to the program that way. Of course, it is a live Saturday show. Our number here tonight, 800-259-9231.
Get your Liberty message out to thousands of people a month, and do it from the back of your car. You can reach all those people for fractions of a penny apiece. Go to libertystickers.com. They have hundreds and hundreds of different Liberty sayings. You can check them out, let your voice be heard. It's libertystickers.com. If you've got a band, a church, a business, and you want just a small run of bumper stickers, I mean, small runs. They can do a dozen, and they can do them extraordinarily cheaply. It's libertystickers.com. They've got special technology for it, libertystickers.com.
All right, so we have Gary Johnson here with us. He is the former governor of New Mexico. When did you leave office?
So January 1 of 2003.
Oh, gosh, it's been that long. Okay. Well, Anyway, so while you were in there and before that, you've been an advocate of ending the insane war on drugs. That's how you came across my radar screen, and I think that's fantastic. I could talk to you all hour about that issue, I'm sure.
Sure.
But there are other things, obviously, that you're up to these days, and one of them is the Our America Initiative at ouramericainitiative.com.
But Gary, this Our America Initiative, and it's great what you guys are doing over there, but come on. Like, it's a run for president, isn't it? I mean...
well, it's a 501c4 advocacy committee. I'm the honorary chairman, which allows me to raise money and speak out on the issues of the day. I get to be a political activist. But, Mark, as part of that 501c4, I can't be talking about running for political office.
Okay, so you're not running for political office that you're running for? Is that what you're saying?
I can't say anything about that. If that would have been legislation that would have passed in New Mexico, I think I would have vetoed it. But it is what it is, and I'm sorry for the cop out on answering that question. But I don't want to get sideways with my legal status.
One thing's for certain, that there's a lot of Republicans that are not running for president at this point that are getting a lot of press time. And I personally, of the field, I find you to be the most interesting of them, of the candidates that aren't candidates yet for president. And one of the reasons is you've got executive experience. So many of them don't, and you took a strong stand for against the drug war as a Republican, and an extraordinary strong stance against just spending and waste. And tell me some of the things that you vetoed 750 bills. I mean, tell me some of the ways.
How many years was that, by the way? 750 bills over
8 years.
Over 8
over
years.
8 years.
That's a lot of vetoing. How some of the ways that you managed to make government more efficient. I mean, it's ludicrous to even say it. What did you manage to do?
Well, unquestionably, the fact that when I took over as governor of New Mexico, there were 12,000 state employees. When I left office, there were 10,800. Unquestionably, to me, that means more efficient government.
Payroll is a huge aspect.
Because I think we did more with fewer people. So unquestionably, I think that's better government. I privatized half of the state's prisons. And this was an apples-to-apples comparison where we ended up spending 2/3 the cost on the private side as we were on the public side. I thought that was good government. We ended up privatizing, made it an option when it came to motor vehicles department that you could actually go and go to motor vehicle private New Mexico and pay a little bit more for being able to go in and get whatever it was that you needed done in a quicker way. But
people didn't need to stand in line at the DMV.
Well, you had a choice. Not that there may not have been a line at the MVD Express, but for the most part, there wasn't a line, and you could get in line. You could. So it brought competition to the MVD. I would have been more outspoken than any governor in the country regarding school choice. I really believe in free markets. I really believe that we all benefit from the lower cost of goods and services. And when it comes to education, it's an exciting notion to me that we might have educational entrepreneurs unleashed to deliver better products, better services when it comes to education in this country, as opposed to what we're currently doing.
Now, you had your own business prior to being the governor, and during.
Yeah, well, so I started a one-man handyman business in Albuquerque in 1974, and in 1994 actually had 1,000 employees,
Wow.
Electrical, mechanical, plumbing, pipe fitting. American dream come true. Show up on time. Do what you say you'll do for people. Do a little bit more than what you say you'll do for people. Now, naively, being in business and having a business that size and being governor of New Mexico was not a plus for business. So I sold that business in 1999. Nobody lost their job, and they're doing better than ever today. They're doing better than ever. But part of the sale of that company had to do with the fact that there were a lot of employees and they needed work, and we weren't getting work that we probably should have gotten. And in retrospect, I kind of understand it. Public Service Company of New Mexico doesn't want to be a front page on the newspaper saying they awarded the governor's company a $15 million contract to do electrical upgrade.
It does. I can see how that would be a problem.
And that was a problem. That was an issue.
So the big issues for in the news right now, healthcare. Where do you stand on the idea? Because I mean, some of one of the front running Republican candidates instituted healthcare right in his state. What socialized
you mean government
run healthcare in his state? Where do you stand?
Coerced healthcare. Yeah.
Well, talking about Medicaid and Medicare, first of all, advocating a balanced budget tomorrow. I advocate balancing the budget tomorrow. So that means cutting government by $1.6 trillion, that being the amount of money that we're borrowing right now. We're borrowing about 43 cents out of every dollar that we're spending.
When you say we, you mean the federal government, because I'm not doing that.
Right.
Just saying.
Right. Yeah. No, I didn't. I'm going to stand corrected, Ian, and hopefully I won't make the same mistake again.
It's all right.
Tonight,
it's just a pet peeve of mine. We've all been indoctrinated in this kind of collectivist speak where you're not working for the federal government either. So, I mean, it's not you and it's not me.
You got it. So, federal government ought to give back to the states the delivery of health care. They ought to cut it by 43%. Medicaid and Medicare, give the delivery of health care back to the states, to leave it to the states as to how health care gets delivered to the poor and those over 65. 50 laboratories of innovation, I think the basis on what this country was founded on.
What about the FDA, getting rid of them entirely? Because one of the things that the federal government does is it increases the cost of health care, even beyond the Medicare and the Medicaid and all that, but with all of its regulatory burdens drastically.
That's exactly what they do. With the regulatory burdens, what we end up with is we end up spending a whole lot more money for products, for goods and services, that otherwise would cost less if it weren't for that burden. And the FDA is a great example of that. And so drug companies hide behind the certification that goes along with the FDA. And what are attorneys for? And don't they do a good job of actually policing the entire system? As opposed to the government, which also tries to do that, but isn't as effective as attorneys.
Or what about Consumer Reports or other alternative third-party organizations that could, step in and fill that role of regulation, voluntary certification, and competition as well?
Absolutely. I mean, you point at the crux of why healthcare is so expensive in this country and what government could do to make it so much more affordable. And what they could do is just really blow the lid off of supply. They could categorically go through and eliminate impediments for healthcare entrepreneurs that would want to enter into the space to deliver better products, better services at lower prices. We talked about marijuana earlier. Medical marijuana is a phenomenon that, 16 states have adopted? That's an alternative to prescription drugs.
It works.
And Mark, you mentioned earlier, I had a serious paragliding accident, very serious paragliding accident about 5 years ago. It took me 3 years to recover. I was a pile of bones.
Hold that thought, Gary. We're going to come back here in just a moment. 800-259-9231. And I got a few tough questions, too, for Gary Johnson. This isn't just going to be a softball interview. More coming up. This is Free Talk Live. This is Free Talk Live. You can bring up whatever you want. Dial in toll free and take control of the airwaves this Saturday evening. However, calls for Gary Johnson will be given priority if you've got a question for the former governor of New Mexico, the liberty-leaning governor. I don't know if I'll go all the way to say I've got some tough questions
all
here.
Right,
in a moment.
Let's just bring him on.
We're going to put him to the test here. But he's definitely somebody that does not make me feel icky when I talk to him, and so that's a plus.
It's a huge plus.
So we'll continue that here in a moment.
LearnLiberty.org. It's a new site featuring libertarian talks and lectures on a variety of topics. It's a great way to explore new avenues within the libertarian perspective. This is a slick, nice website. You can go check out the videos there. It'll teach you all kinds of things about liberty. Phil Magnus is talking about his new book on Lincoln and the plans to deport free slaves to Belize. Nigel Ashford is discussing the 10 fundamental principles of classical liberal thought in under 10 minutes. And Professor Anthony Davies shows just how bad our government debt is. And Stephen Horowitz provides a sympathetic answer to, are the rich really getting richer and the poor really getting poorer? Go check it out at learnliberty.org.
All right, so we're going to continue here. Of course, your questions for Gary Johnson. Welcome at 800-259-9231. Now then, Gary, obviously we agree on a lot of stuff. I mean, getting rid of government regulations, all in favor of that. More freedom, all good. More ability to do business, more ability to control your own body. We're on the same page, no doubt. But what about... You've got this Our America initiative at ouramericainitiative.com. You used the term good government earlier. I don't think you can convince me that there could be such a thing as a good government. I mean, isn't all government force? How could that be good? If you're,
I don't know if I'm going to engage in. I don't know if I'm going to argue that point. I think that good government. You certainly argue that as opposed to what's currently happening, that there might be a better government. Maybe I should be saying better government.
You could make that point. You're right. There's always different degrees, right? And going in the right direction, I fully support. And it seems like you certainly are somebody that wants to turn things generally in the right direction, and that is away from more intrusion in people's lives.
I likened it to turning a supertanker around. I mean, what does that actually physically take? When you decide you're going to turn a supertanker around, it takes
it must take a day.
8 miles to actually do the U-turn. Well, first you got to reverse the engines, and it still takes 8 miles to turn.
I think I'd rather get it to just take on water and let it go down. Let gravity do the work for you there.
I'll take somebody in office that's trying to turn it around.
All right. So, okay, now the Our America Initiative, ouramericainitiative.com, it says here at the top left, the United States of America. How do you feel about secession?
How do I feel about secession?
Yeah.
Does a state have the right to secede?
Yeah, no, I got it. I guess we fought a civil war over that, so I wouldn't want to relive that civil war. But
do you believe
philosophically speaking, sure.
Do you think that would be what would happen today? Like if, let's say, New Hampshire or Vermont, for instance, the state legislatures decided that we've had enough of this federal government just taking a bunch of money from us and getting involved in wars and killing people around the world. We're done. We're out of here. We don't want anything to do with it anymore. Do you really think that it would come down to the federal government rolling in tanks or something scary like that?
No, I certainly don't. And the bankruptcy. I mean I'm really under the belief that we're on the verge of an imminent financial collapse, and how's that going to manifest itself? And the solution lies in giving everything back to the states. That is the solution.
That was sort of the way the Constitution was written. I mean, that 10th Amendment says that something to the effect that anything that's not specifically enumerated here in the Constitution or prohibited to it by the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people.
So talking about just using the notion of secession, using the notion of what somebody mentioned the other night, which is tribes and pueblos in this country are sovereign nations within the United States. Yeah. And as a result of that, there are opportunities that exist within tribes and pueblos to do things that the states can't. Hospitals, for example, research and development, drug development on Indian reservations. It kind of goes on and on and on. It's a really exciting concept that you could separate yourself from the federal government and actually make innovation worldwide that would really make a difference for mankind.
Absolutely.
So I think without secession, why can't we foster that notion within the country that we have? And now we're back to the 50 states model.
Yeah, I think that nullification, which is what I believe you're talking about here, states standing up for their sovereign rights within the Constitution that were given to them. The federal government has stepped all over that in the last 50 years, maybe more. That nullification is probably the practical solution, it seems to me, where a state says just, nope, we're not participating in that. Thanks very much.
I would argue, Mark, that a president of the United States that really was under the belief that states should be the innovators, that the federal government shouldn't get involved, that it shouldn't be top-down, and a Congress made up of like-minded individuals. And you could argue that would never be possible, but that might be a quicker route to make that happen, or a better easier way to make that happen.
It can be difficult for a president, an executive, to get things done. However, what an executive can do is stop things from happening. They have that veto power, and it's powerful.
I agree.
Toll-free number here tonight, 800-259-9231. Of course, you can bring up whatever you want down the line here when Gary decides that he wants to leave. As far as I'm concerned, if you want to stick with us for a little while in hour number 2, you're welcome to do so. I'll leave that in your hands
Great.
To decide. And I appreciate it because I don't really feel like – Mark, honestly, do you think that – Gary has been sliming out of any questions? I don't feel like he has.
Hitting hard. He's hit them all right back. Gary, I got a hard one for you though. You were the governor of New Mexico. That puts you right there on the border. So many Americans are concerned about the immigration issue. What's your stand?
Well, first of all, I think immigration's a good thing. I think this is a country based on immigration. So I think that we should make it as easy as possible to get a work visa. And I think it's important to distinguish between a work visa and citizenship or a green card, permanent non-residence. Oh, boy, and here we get into the government and what we've done to ourselves when we get into these clarifications. But anyway, make it easy to get a work visa. And I think a work visa should entail a background check. I think a work visa should entail a Social Security card so that applicable taxes get paid. Immigration should be about work, not welfare. And there we have issues with welfare in this country. Are Mexican citizens coming into the United States to take entry-level jobs from Americans? Absolutely not, because we as Americans can sit at home and collect a welfare check that's a little bit less money or the same amount of money. With regard to the 11 million illegal immigrants that are here in this country right now, I think we need to set up a grace period by which they can get a legal work visa. Not citizenship, not a green card, legal work visa. Understanding that the main reason that they're here illegally is the government has made it impossible to get a work visa. And because they've made it impossible to get a work visa because
it's impossible to do almost anything.
It's impossible to just about do anything. That industries have quotas. That there are quotas when it comes to these work visas. I mean, do away with all that. Let the market determine whether or not there's a need for the labor. And then once you do that, once you pass laws that I think are enforceable, then enforce the law. That if you're here in this country working illegally, you'll be arrested, you'll be deported, and you won't come back and work again. With regard to securing the borders, the notion of building a fence that's 2,000 miles long, that's impenetrable, the notion of putting the National Guard across 2,000 miles of border, I think would be a whole lot of money spent with little, if any, benefit whatsoever. And then quickly touching on the marijuana issue, legalize marijuana, and arguably 75% of the border violence with Mexico goes away, that being the estimate of the drug cartel's activities engaged in marijuana.
Yeah, I saw a video on YouTube of the impenetrable border fence being scaled by some 12-year-olds. It was awesome. Just quick.
I think they were 15.
Whatever. Teenagers climbing your $billion border fence. What a fantastic boondoggle that is.
I think that impenetrable fence would probably be more like several $100 billion.
Reagan essentially did what you're talking about, and so many people, Maybe somebody listening can correct me, but what he did, though, is the government went back to setting quotas and they made it unenforceable. The government doesn't need to be setting quotas for this, and the government should enforce laws that get passed.
That's
and
the point I really want to talk about here. When we come back, you're going to stick with us, right, into hour number 2? All right, Gary Johnson is here. He's almost like not a real politician, but he's actually been in political office. He was the governor of New Mexico. You've been giving us pretty straight answers here, Gary, and I appreciate you being forthcoming with your thoughts on these issues because they're very important ones. And I think immigration is one of the most important of our time. It's also one of the most misunderstood. And I think that what I've heard from you so far is less objectionable than what I hear from most politicians. So I'd like to dig in a little further on it in a moment here. 800-259-9231 is the SACL CAI toll-free line. Hour 2 is next. If you've got a question for Gary Johnson, he's here with us and he's sticking with us. 800-259-9231. This is Free Talk Live. You can take control of the airwaves and dial in toll-free at 1-800-259-9231. That's the SACL CAI toll-free line as we launch here into the second hour of this program. You can bring up anything you want here, but calls are being given priority for those who have a question for Gary Johnson. He is the former governor of New Mexico, and he is here with us tonight, actually in studio on traveling around, visiting people, talking about his Our America initiative, which you can learn more about over at ouramericainitiative.com. And just to bring you up to speed briefly on who Gary Johnson is, he is somebody who came across my radar many years ago because of his stance against the insanity of the war on drugs. And as it turns out, he's actually somebody that has been in politics and apparently has retained his soul. Gary, welcome back to Free Talk Live.
Thank you, Ian.
Glad you're here.
It is good. It's fun to be here.
Good. Well, New Hampshire is a great place, and we're going to talk a little bit more about New Hampshire in a little bit and the Free State Project, because I know you're familiar with it. You were at the Porcupine Freedom Festival last year, and we're going to talk about this coming Pork Fest here in a little bit. Our number again, 800-259-9231. But as I said during the last hour, even though there's a lot we agree on, I mean, one of the things you did while you were in office in the 8 years that you were was veto. Was it approximately 750 pieces of legislation?
It was right on the head. 750 pieces and thousands of line items. That's kind of an estimate on the line items, but the bills were 750. Only 2 were overridden, so it made a huge difference.
Wow, that's incredible.
The
claim is that number is approximately the same number as would be if you combined all of the other 49 governors and all the other 49 states together. You vetoed as many as all of them combined, basically. That's quite, so that's something worth bragging about, I think.
You're a vetoing mofo.
Well, that's important. I mean, there's not very many people in politics who are willing to say no. I mean, Ron Paul and Gary Johnson, I think, are two of a few.
I was going to say that a third of those vetoes were vetoes of Republican bills. They were Republican bills. Republicans seem to grow government just like the Democrats. Only
it's a myth, the idea that for small government.
Republicans did it in a good way. They did it in a way that would just grow government temporarily, but ultimately would lead to smaller government. I never bought that argument.
I haven't seen the evidence of it, right? I mean,
why would you want to grow government to fix a problem if government's a bad solution? If government's a good solution, let's go ahead and grow government. I don't believe that for a second, but the idea that you can use government to solve a problem when you've got a problem just doesn't make much sense to me.
Well, I think 100 of my vetoes too were vetoes of bills where the vote in the legislature was 117-0, and I would have vetoed the legislation. I'd have said to the Republicans, you know what, I had to read this, and here's what it said, and you were pressed for time, and here's what it says, and here's why I'm going to veto it, because I think it spends money that isn't going to make a difference in any of our lives.
So coming back around to the issue of immigration, which Mark brought up, and I'm glad you did, Mark. That way I'm not the only one asking the hardball questions here tonight, because I had it on my list of things to ask about as well. You said a lot of things that I felt showed some compassion on the issue of immigration, and that, again, is something you don't typically hear from somebody calling themselves a Republican. Usually it's, crack down, kick them out, kill them, whatever.
I don't care about compassion. I care about what works, and I think that he's got a system that works.
Well, I think compassion's important, too, because we're talking about human beings here.
I think compassion works. But I think I want what works.
Well, and what works is freedom from my perspective. And you talked about how, and please correct me if I'm recapping this incorrectly, but you talked about how immigration is important. And, you're not somebody that wants to stop it. You're somebody who wants to make, through the legal process, as awful as that is, make it easier. You realize that the government's ICE department, formerly known as INS, that it's very difficult. The immigration service, it makes it very difficult for people to come here, whether it's on work visas or whatever the paperwork is called. It's like a nightmare for people to go through this.
And then touching on the fact, too, that we are educating foreign students in this country. And because of our immigration laws, because of our convoluted immigration laws, we're sending them back to their country of origin as opposed to letting them stay here to ultimately, I think, create tens of millions of jobs in startup companies.
Immigrants are huge entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. As opposed to going back to India and employing tens of millions of Indians in jobs that may have been here.
Right. I mean, how good is that for the United States' economic future to educate a bunch of engineers and send them to other countries? Why would would you want that?
Well, and that's what we're doing, and that doesn't make any sense.
That's what they're doing.
Eliminate the corporate income tax. Also, eliminate the corporate income tax, understanding that it's a double tax. Eliminate the corporate income tax, and I think tens of millions of jobs get created here that otherwise would have been that.
I've eliminated the income tax from my own life, but it's not a corporate one. I think that we should eliminate all taxes. But
so let's step down to philosophy just for a second. Something you've said here,
all
Gary.
right, I've got more on immigration.
I know.
Mark.
We'll get back to it. But you said about the corporate income tax, and I find it interesting. Corporations are a construct of the government. And so, therefore, they would be the only thing that the government could legitimately tax. The government creates corporations, so therefore, taxing corporations. I agree that it's a double tax. I agree that if I have a corporation, they tax the corporation, then they tax my own income, and that's a double tax. But the government doesn't own me, so it can't own my labor. So how can it, in fact, tax my work and the fruits of my labor, sort of from a legitimate standpoint? I kind of feel like the government provides these protections through corporations, and therefore those corporations are the only things that could be taxed.
No, I understand it. I got it. I got it. Would we be better off without an income tax at all? And by better off, was it legitimate in the first place? No, I clearly, but this is the reality. This is where we're at right now, and I guess I would always take the position that we can improve on where we're at.
So back to the immigration issue. And again, if you've got a question for Gary Johnson, he's here with us at 800-259-9231. So
right, he's not running for president.
Whatever that means. Anyway, I wasn't going to even ask you any questions about presidential stuff. I just care about you and what you think. So to the point that you made about enforcement of immigration, you were talking about how you want to reduce the regulations, you want to make it easier, and I certainly I support anything that makes it easier for people to come here and make a better life for themselves. You talked about how welfare is a huge problem. There's no doubt about that. If you've got a welfare system, giving out handouts to people may attract the wrong kind of person, whereas if there isn't that huge government welfare mentality, then you're going to attract more of the entrepreneurial folks or the people that are trying to get away from tyranny or whatever it is that the reason is coming here. They're coming here for a better life. There are a lot of people that come here for those reasons, and it sounds like you know that. But you were talking about a lot of the people that are already here and the idea of giving them this grace period to become carded
get a work visa,
or whatever, and then to enforce. And that's where I really question, because you are somebody who gets it on the issue of prohibition, right? You understand that the government can't prohibit things. It just drives those products and services into the black market. Human beings are the same. You prohibit human beings, or you create this enforcement mentality of, for instance, and I'm not saying this is what you're proposing, but what we see now is these government bureaucracies, the ICE people coming in, raiding people's businesses, holding people at gunpoint, looking through files, checking to see if so-and-so is an immigrant or so-and-so isn't, separating, people from their families. And I understand that the government has all these rules, and, they're almost impossible to figure out, and that's why people don't follow them and jump through those hoops. But do you really think that enforcing these rules is going to create a better, more free place? It seems like that would kind of lead us more down a kind of scary police state road.
Well, if you don't make the laws easily enforceable, and by easily enforceable, we're back to this notion of really handshake. Why would you be in this country? Why would you be in this country working illegally if it were so easy to get a work visa? I think the only reason that you'd perhaps be in this country working illegally is perhaps if you did have something in your background that you shouldn't be in this country. So maybe that ends up to be the real separator. Maybe it makes it easier.
Who shouldn't be here?
Rapist, murderer, convict.
Mark, what did you do for 9 years in Florida?
I spent 9 years in prison, but I do think
for what?
For murder. The fact is, I do think that you can't sell the idea of immigration reform without having some level of cracking down. And
I'm saying is, not everybody that went to prison for murder shouldn't be able to have a new life.
I'm really curious about this, because
I'll tell you about it during the break.
No, I'm sure of it.
We'll come back in a moment.
This is a great story.
More with Gary Johnson.
Story.
He's with us, and if you've got a question for him, we'll certainly take your call at 800-259-9231. His website, OurAmericaInitiative.com. This is Free Talk Live. You take control. Bring up what you want. This is Free Talk Live. You can take control of the airwaves. Dialing toll-free at 800-259-9231. However, if you have a question for Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico, and not the typical politician. He's here with us in the studio, 800-259-9231. He is involved with his Our America initiative, which you can go to ouramericainitiative.com. There's a lot that we've agreed on so far, and I feel like we've been getting straight answers from Gary. He can look you in the eye. You can tell he actually has soul in him, as opposed to most politicians who have that apparently. Either it's already been ripped out of them before they get into political office, or it happens.
They were just born without it.
Sometimes. It happens sometime later on, but he's here and he seems like a genuinely honest kind of dude, which is atypical for politicians.
Thank you, Ian.
So I really appreciate you taking the time, especially like you're not running out the door either, which is cool. I mean, we haven't scared you away with the questions that we've been asking. So anyway, I appreciate that. We're going to get right back into your calls here at 800-259-9231. But first, want to make sure you know about the Porcupine Freedom Festival. Gary was actually there last year's, the 2010 Pork Fest. And, of course, we were there broadcasting live, and we will be there again this year, June 20th through the 26th. It's been expanded. It's officially now the full week. It's kind of always been a week-long event unofficially, but now it is officially expanding out. And looking forward to seeing you there. If you love the ideas of liberty, that is, this is the place for you, because hundreds of like-minded, liberty-oriented people will be in attendance, as they were last year. Over 800 people in attendance at the Pork Fest last year, and this year probably going to be, 900,000, something like that. But you could be there. We're still taking registrations. The Free State Project is putting it on. It's going to be at Rogers Campground in the beautiful White Mountains of New Hampshire. Gary, was it your first Porcupine Freedom Festival last year?
First Porcupine Freedom Festival.
How pretty was it?
It was really very, very beautiful, and it was fun. It was a fun event.
Great people too, right?
Great people, yeah.
I mean, they're just incredible. That's the real reason to go. The scenery's nice, but the people there are the real reason. The socializing that you'll have the chance to do, fun stuff like family fun, activities, agorism in action, games, lots of parties and campfires. The whole deal. It's a great camping time.
Well, and I very rarely find myself having to defend my record on me being too big a government. And maybe everybody listening has that same sense too. But at Pork Fest, I found myself not defending, but having to defend the fact that I was too big a government guy.
Yes, it's a hardcore group of people.
Probably the smallest government governor in the history of the United States. And then, at Pork Fest, people might want even a smaller one than what you were proposing.
Yeah,
right.
They're the kind of people that are going to hold your feet to the flames, as we've done to some extent tonight. And I think you've been really good sport here with us. So go to porkfest.com to register today and join us for PorkFest 2011. That's PORCFEST, porkfest.com. Use the coupon code FreeTalkLive. That's our show name, all run together. So take out the spaces. Use our coupon code FreeTalkLive to save 20% on your early bird registration at porkfest.com. As we go to Bill, listening to WSC in Charleston, South Carolina. Bill, you're on with Gary Johnson.
Hi, Governor. I know you are advocating the legalization or the use of marijuana. I just think that I work as an adjunct in the criminal justice system here locally, and for the past 40 years, I have seen the drug problems in our area, as well as the entire country, have just gotten worse and worse and worse, and it's not going to ever get any better until somebody addresses the problem in a rational way. I feel that the only rational way to do it is to just legalize everything. And if you take the criminal stigma away from drugs and just make it available, tax it. You were talking about, the FDA is a useless arm of the government, and just let people use whatever drugs they want. If they're going to kill themselves, they do it illegally now. Legalizing it is not going to stop it. And the states and federal government could probably save, I'd say conservatively, $1 trillion over the space of 3 years in, just enforcing laws that don't get enforced.
Well, I think you hit it on the head. I think that 90% of the drug problem is prohibition related. not use-related. That's not to discount the problems with use and abuse, but that ought to be the focus. It's estimated about $70 billion a year when it comes to the courts, the prisons, and law enforcement. So that would be a very significant savings. I am advocating the legalization of marijuana. When it comes to the other drugs, I'm advocating harm reduction strategies, which in a nutshell is looking at the drug problem first as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. I think we legalize marijuana. I think we take giant strides toward what I'll just call rational drug policy moving forward. But I think we have to start somewhere, and I think the start ought to be legalizing marijuana.
Bill, thank you for your call and your thoughts tonight. I appreciate hearing from you at 800-259-9231. Since we brought it back around because of Bill's question, I guess I jumped to a conclusion. I mean, so you don't advocate the full-on ending of prohibition?
What I will admit to readily is that the world would be this country would be a much better place if we legalized all drugs tomorrow.
Okay, good. Oh,
yeah.
That's good. That's good because that's the sensible solution.
But what I am advocating is just the legalization of marijuana, which I think.
How about decriminalization? Because some would say there's a difference between legalization, which kind of takes things out of the black market and puts it into a kind of regulated marketplace. How about decriminalizing the other drugs?
Well, and this is back to what I was saying earlier. In a nutshell, we should look at all the rest of the drug problem, all the rest of the drug issue, first as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue.
You know,
so when you talk about decriminalization, I think it's important to draw on what's happened in Portugal. I think it's important to draw on what's happened in Holland.
But for people that don't know what's happened in Portugal,
that's what I was going to point it out. 10 years ago, Portugal decriminalized all drug use, and as a result of doing that, Portugal and Holland have effectively decriminalized all drug use. Portugal's actually done it.
Yeah.
But each of these countries has 60% the drug use as that of the United States. That's on a per capita basis. That's marijuana, that's hard drugs, that's kids, and that's adults. Portugal, over the last 10 years, has documented a 50% reduction in heroin use simply because they've decriminalized.
It's incredible.
It's incredible. So these are the kinds of things that I think when you start talking about drug policy, and I think it starts with marijuana, when you start talking about it, when you get... The drug issue is an issue that does really well in the light of day. The drug issue, because of Proposition 19 in California, because it was a topic of conversation on millions of dinner tables across this country where it otherwise wouldn't have been a topic of conversation, I think the issue advanced as a result of that. So legalize marijuana, the whole conversation that evolves around that and the discussion and the realization and the epiphanies that people come to, I think lend itself toward this notion of rational drug policy regarding all the other drugs. We're right now 2 years away from being at a national tipping point on the legalization of marijuana. 46% of Americans right now support legalizing marijuana in 2 years as a result of this gain in acceptance or understanding. This 2 years we're at a point where the majority of Americans are going to support that.
We're going to come back with more. Gary Johnson sticking with us, right?
Sticking
All right,
with,
this is great.
Yeah.
800-259-9231. He's here. He'll take your questions. Your thoughts are welcome. 1-800-259-9231. You Dr. Gary Johnson. Later on, you can take control, bring up whatever you want. It's Free Talk Live. Talk Live. It's the live Saturday edition of the program, and you can, of course, bring up anything you want here. Gary Johnson is with us, and, of course, we'll continue taking calls for Gary, and then... I don't know what Gary's going to do for the rest of the night. He can take off whenever he wants to. I mean, he's been one of the best. I had his mic off. I apologize. Go ahead. You're back on now.
I'll just torture the two of you for another segment.
All right, sounds good.
But thanks. I really appreciate being on. It's been fun.
Absolutely.
Fun.
His website, by the way, OurAmericaInitiative.com, and people do have questions for you, Gary. So we're just going to continue with those. Let's talk to Ty in Tennessee on the amp lines. Ty, you're on with Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. He's with us here tonight.
Excellent. Hey, I just wanted to say you are one of only two politicians with national recognition I know of who really get it as far as liberty goes. that is a compliment, and it's also a sad commentary on the state of politics in the U.S. Let's say a miracle happened and you were elected president of the United States. What would you do that would have a lasting impact on individual liberty here?
Ty, first off, I appreciate what you have to say. I'm really trying to grow the Republican Party here because I see the Republican Party as the only party capable of fixing what's happened. And I also will immediately acknowledge that the Republicans bear complete responsibility or shared responsibility for where we're at. Republicans did control Congress and the presidency and passed a prescription health care benefit.
Gary, before you're right about all that. Before you get to the answer to the question, but was it Trent, somebody or other, one of those politicians, say years ago that they had slashed the government to the bone? I mean, the Republicans, when they were in charge,
I thought it was delay, but
it was like it was a Republican guy that said it, like that they had cut it to the bone. You don't agree with him?
I don't agree at all. No, I don't agree at all.
Sorry to distract you.
No.
So what would you do? I mean, that's the question.
So Ty, as governor, and we're speaking hypothetically, but as governor of New Mexico, the notion was to take it all on, A through Z. There weren't going to be any sacred cows. That it was going to be putting the issues that should be on the front burner, regardless of the political consequence. And so, right off the bat, we need to balance the federal budget. Right off the bat, we need to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan. Right off the bat, and back to balancing the budget. That's cutting government spending by 45%. That's cutting government spending by $1.6 trillion. That's Medicaid, that's Medicare, that's reforming Social Security, that's cutting defense by that amount of money. It's really going through and doing it with everything, believing that none of us that there may be some pain involved in that, but better pain than suffering and death. The consequence of actually seeing this country implode, which is where we're at.
Isn't balancing the budget merely a Band-Aid at this point? I mean, we're over the cliff. It would take a lot more than just balancing the budget to get this right on track. We'd have to really have some drastic cuts. And my problem is, with the political situation is that there are just too few people with the liberty mindset of saying that, let us fix ourselves and get rid of this back and forth political football that's been going on for 200 years and actually, let people work out their own situations. You know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to figure out what one man or two, seeing as how, the other person, Ron Paul, that comes to mind is the only other person I know that gets it in the national political sphere. I'm just kind of skeptical about what can really be accomplished that will have a lasting impact.
Ty, thanks for the call.
Do you feel like you had a lasting impact in New Mexico?
Good question. Thanks for the call, Ty. Appreciate it.
Well, I always said, regardless of what happened after I left, that it would never be the same again because of what I was able to bring to bear, which was really the whole notion of small government. And Ty, you bring about a reality here, and that is, is any of this going to be worthwhile? I guess I'm on the optimistic side of this, that there really is hope, and that it should be driven. You point out that the Band-Aid would be balancing the budget. It's important to point out right now that Congress is talking about reducing spending by $38 billion, going to $100 billion next year. Rand Paul has suggested a $500 billion reduction. I would just say that $1,600,000 would go beyond the notion of Band-Aid.
Yeah, right. This is, it's the idea that if you're in a hole, stop digging. And I think that is the first place to go. Yes, the debt is tremendous and it needs to be addressed, but I think the first thing you need, like there needs to be the first goal.
And I don't want to discount what Ty had to say either, which is really there is a hopelessness. There is a hopelessness about this.
Let's bring it to a personal level. I mean, the question reminded me of something, and that is when I was getting into the ideas of liberty a decade ago, it was Harry Brown. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was the Libertarian Party's presidential candidate in the year 1996 and 2000. And he wrote a couple of great books. One of them is one of my favorites, Why Government Doesn't Work. And it's just a brilliant piece wherein he defines, one of the chapters is what I would do were I elected president. And he talks about how there's, even though there's clearly a lot he can't do as the one man, there is a lot that he could do. And he mentioned bringing the troops home from the 700-plus military bases around the world. I mean, that's something that the president can just go ahead and do. And you talked about Iraq and Afghanistan, which is great. Also, he talked about pardoning people. And because this is a human issue. You mentioned the 1.5 plus million people that are arrested every year in the war on drugs. Many of those federal arrests, a lot of people in the federal prison system, I think last I heard it was like 60% or more.
73%. 73% of federal prison are individuals that have sold small amounts of drugs on numerous occasions and been caught. Mandatory sentence.
Peaceful people. They weren't shooting people or anything.
Arguably nonviolent, victimless crime.
So what would you think about something like that? Like, is that something that you would do?
Well, yeah. One of the untold stories about the prohibition of alcohol was after alcohol prohibition was repealed, that there was letting go out of prison those individuals that had been convicted and put there. Now,
but you wouldn't have to wait for that, though, right? You could just get into political office. And if you were elected president, then you could just
Ty,
swing that pen.
Ian, that's one of my points here. Is it's kind of an untold story when it came to prohibition of alcohol and what happened afterwards, and that yes, that would be part of it. As governor of New Mexico, one thing I put out there was that I was going to look to pardon anybody that was in there for drugs, not selling drugs, and I go back also to the time period when I was doing this, which was really 10, 11 years ago when I was doing this. And this was pretty cutting edge at that time. I've come since to recognize that, and not that I didn't at the time and not that I didn't try and articulate at the time the notion of the drug pusher, that it was a completely misunderstood notion that the person that sells drugs really is just the user that gets thrust into the role of having to sell drugs because the person ahead of him has been arrested,
or because it's so expensive to buy the drugs.
And so much of state prisons are filled with individuals that have committed other crime associated with drugs, but drugs being kind of the root of the crime, but having committed violent acts associated with drugs.
Clearly,
I don't know if those people ever get let out of prison given their sentencing.
Right. Clearly, people that have done violence don't deserve to be let out.
Harm to others, I think, would be the key.
Right. And of course, it should be pointed out though that a lot of those things, those violent acts, happen, and this. It's because of prohibition driving those prices up.
Disputes played out with guns rather than the courts.
So now I was told by someone that that had been asked of you when you were, I guess, governors, to whether you would pardon people, and that you didn't. You're saying that you were looking at doing that. Did you actually pardon somebody?
I took two people out of prison and set them free.
Could you have done more?
No, I wasn't aware of more. And that went outside the category of selling drugs. I imagine there were a lot that had sold drugs, and that's the only thing that they would have done. But that was a category that I said I was going to exclude.
Do you want one more segment?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, more with Gary Johnson in a moment.
Right.
It's Free Talk Live. You can take control. Free Talk Live. You can bring up anything you want. Dial in toll free at 800-259-9231. Take control of the airwaves. 800-259-9231. And joining you this evening, it's Ian.
And Mark.
And we have our special guest with us for the remainder of this segment. So if you wanted to ask a question Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico. He is here in the studio with us tonight. He's here, and as a part of the Our America Initiative, which is his website, ouramericainitiative.com, we've been all over the map with questions, both softball and hardball, and he's been a great sport. He's one of my favorite politicians, and that list is all of two.
Right, not a long
people,
list.
Or two or three, maybe. So,
all right, so you made my evening.
Thanks for making the trip out here, too. I mean, it's a long way from Manchester to come out here to Little Keene, New Hampshire, out in the corner of the state, so I appreciate that.
Intern for Liberty. Make a difference, get experience, and get paid. The Institute for Humane Studies is seeking undergraduates, graduate students, and recent graduates for its summer internship programs. They have internships in all kinds of journalism and public policy. The internship includes a generous stipend, housing assistance, career workshops, and training throughout the summer. This is an excellent opportunity if you are in college or just graduating from college this year, for you to get a leg up. It's many of the graduates have gone on to things like ABC's 2020, the Financial Times, the Cato Institute, Washington Post, and many more. It's libertarianinternships.com. Go there, sign up. More information, and you can receive updates and reminders. libertarianinternships.com.
All right, so we're going to continue here. Gary Johnson is with us, and we're going to go right back into your calls because we've got Kenneth on the line listening to WFLA-FM in the Tallahassee area. Hello, Kenneth.
Yes, sir.
Hey, you're on with Gary Johnson.
Okay, I have a kind of a comment and a question for you.
Sure.
I would hope you could answer. I have done a little bit of research into the Founding Fathers and so forth, and I've discovered that they really never intended to have taxation on the citizenry of America, and they actually intended to make the money for the government and so forth from the export of goods, from taxation of the export of goods. Now, the Republican Party, now I'm not a Democrat and I'm not really a Republican either, but I lean more towards Republican because the Democrats are too crazy. But what I see that the Republicans have done is they have opened up a free trade agreement where we have free trade with all these other countries. And yet I've traveled around the world several different places, and I realize that the other countries do not have free trade. And I know that the Mexican problem that we have, the illegal immigration problem that we have, is mostly the cause of free trade because the farmers that were in Mexico were doing just fine until all this free trade stuff got passed, and then they started coming over the borders because they couldn't sell their goods because big international corporations, not necessarily just regular American corporations, but international corporations who can go anywhere they want to go, leave America if they want, if it's cheaper, and
so what was your question?
They've kind of influxed, into other countries and causing hardship in those countries as well. And I'm wondering, what's your opinion on the free trade, thing that the Republicans have been behind for so long?
I would just argue that we move further and further away from free trade, and that Republicans contribute to that, and maybe the problems stem from not free trade.
Free trade are you talking?
The problems stem from what I call corporatist legislation that favors one business over another on bigness, as opposed to a level playing field that government could be engaged. The government could be engaged in true free trade, but really impede free trade.
Yeah, that's why I thought that the caller's premise, Kenneth, your premise was just wrong right out the gate. I mean, what free trade are you talking about? The Republicans and Democrats for years have been creating more and more regulations, making it more difficult for people to trade with people.
But they've touted it. They've labeled it as free trade.
Yeah,
all this stuff.
Right. Well, yeah, they labeled the Patriot Act too. And thank you for the call tonight. I appreciate hearing from you at 800-259-9231. It's really important for people to understand things like we don't have free trade. If you have to pay some government bureaucrat before you can do a business deal with someone over in China, or they have to pay a government bureaucrat, you don't have free trade. You
don't need an 800-page document to make free trade. I mean, free trade is the lack of large documents, not the institution of them. Gary Johnson,
would you agree with that?
Yes,
Gary?
Yes, I would.
What do you think about the Federal Reserve and the U.S. dollar? I think that the U.S. dollar's been taking a beating in the international markets, and I think the chance exists that it will cease to be the world's reserve currency sometime in the next 5 years. What do you think?
If I were president of the United States and Congress were to pass a bill abolishing the Federal Reserve, I'd sign that bill. If Congress were to pass legislation to create competing currency or to return to a commodity-based currency, gold, I would sign that legislation. I don't see it happening, but I would certainly support that. I think the Federal Reserve right now is skating on the thinnest ice that a skater can possibly skate on, that we're gambling at the absolute highest level, given 0% interest rates, the fact that we're buying up our own treasuries. Clearly, the Federal Reserve recognizes how precarious it all is, and certainly transparency when it comes to the Federal Reserve is something that ought to happen immediately, and let the financial markets discount what they probably already ascertained.
Now, the president, I'm by no means an expert on politics, but the president is the guy who nominates the head of the Federal Reserve. Is that so? So you could assumably, if you were to win the office.
So keeping the Federal Reserve, getting it back to its original mandate of price stability, as opposed to what has now been added, which is employment onto that. The notion of a strong dollar versus a weak dollar. These, I thought, were things that the Federal Reserve was all about.
Actually, I think the Federal Reserve was about putting the control of the monetary system into the hands of a few, elite bankers back in 1913.
Well, it has worked out that way.
Yeah,
it has worked out that way.
So, real quick, term limits. A lot of people talk about term limits these days. It's a very populist issue. Where do you stay? You were term limited out as the governor of New Mexico.
I'm a living example of why term limits work. As governor, it's a job I really liked. I really liked the job. So for 4 years, I try and push the envelope as much as I possibly can, recognizing that maybe I'll get another 4 years, because I really enjoy the job. I got to tell you, it was fun. And then when I got reelected, well, to me, then there is no tomorrow. This is I need to do everything that I possibly can to do things right. And not,
I don't think most politicians see it that way.
Not that I didn't the first 4 years, but that second 4 years was a cloud hanging over my first 4. I had a chance for another 4. If I'd have had a chance for another 4 or another 4, maybe I'm not as bold as that I'm going to make the outrageous claim that I was.
So, Gary, we're running short on time. You're going to be leaving us here in a few moments. And again, I want to say I really appreciate you taking the time to come talk to us on Free Talk Live. It's been great. But what question haven't we asked that we should have asked you, if anything?
Oh, I'm sure there are a zillion. And anyways, a pleasure being on. Really, pleasure.
Okay, so you get the last final thoughts here from you, Gary. I mean, what do you want to hear? I guess what would you like our audience to hear from you tonight? What message would you like to get out?
Well, my message. I got to actually serve. The notion here that I believe the Republican Party is the only party that's capable of fixing where we're at. I'm trying to grow the Republican Party. I've had the unique experience to have actually gotten elected, espousing what I think is really small government and liberty and freedom and the personal responsibility that goes along with that. And I always like to point out to people that I think what's really significant is that given what I did in office, I would have gotten elected and reelected in a state that's 2-to-1 Democrat on issues that wouldn't be associated with that party. So good stewardship of tax dollars, I guess, really resonates with people, and I think I'm living proof of that.
Gary's website is ouramericainitiative.com, and there's a list of things that you're going to be doing up there. Speaking at the SSDP Students for Sensible Drug Policy Convention coming up in just a couple weeks, apparently. So,
yep.
People can go there to keep in touch with you. ouramericainitiative.com, and I'm sure we'll see you again in New Hampshire at some point.
Yes.
Thanks for coming in tonight. By the way, this program brought to you by SACL CAI. We've got a full hour remaining. Your chance to take control of the airwaves is coming up next at 800-259-9231. Free Talk Live.